President Mandel, Williams College trustees, faculty, staff, alums, family and friends, and the senior class of 2024, thank you so much for the incredible honor to be with you today and for the opportunity to speak. I can't begin to tell you how much that really means to me. To my fellow Bicentennial Medal recipients, congratulations and thank you for the inspiring work that each of you is doing in such a variety of wonderful ways to open up opportunities for learning here and across the world. I also want to thank my husband, Charles, an educator who established the first community college campus in inner-city Providence, Rhode Island. As a child, he entered kindergarten in Garner, North Carolina, the year that Brown versus Board of Education was decided, and graduated 12 years later, having attended all black schools for the entire time. He attended an HBCU, Shaw University, and wasn't in an integrated educational setting until he obtained a master's in education at UMass. From there, he went on to become the first African-American state senator to be elected to the Rhode Island State Senate, a seat he held for 18 years. We met because when they tried to dismantle his district, he needed a voting rights attorney. But I will tell you that having a judge and a former legislator in the same household can be tricky sometimes. He wants to make all the laws, but I get to interpret them. At any rate, I am grateful to him. He is a political genius and the best feminist I know. To the senior class, my message to you today is a simple one. Never underestimate your power when you bring your full self to the table. To me, that is the heart of what democracy means and why diversity matters. So what do I mean by bringing your full self? I will confess that I'm still learning what that requires and why it matters, and that coming to Williams as the daughter of a black man and a white woman who married when it was illegal in many places for them to marry, this was the first time I had to think about what my full self might mean in an environment where I didn't have the comfort of my family around me. Jimmy Cliff sang, "Stand up and fight back, you've got nothing to lose." Ella's song, written for Ella Baker, starts with, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes." Those songs and others like them were on the soundtrack in my mind in the fall of 1980 when I sat where you are sitting now. On that day in September, I would not have predicted that our homecoming weekend would see a cross burning on campus and greater attention to what it meant to be a black student at Williams in that era. But some of the biggest influences that have stayed with me from my time at Williams are the people who came to campus, including Bernice Johnson Reagan of Sweet Honey in the Rock. Bernice Reagan was a founding member of SNCC's Freedom Singers in the Albany movement in Georgia in the 1960s, which meant that as a high school student, she was protesting, going to jail, and singing freedom songs. Later, she was interviewed about what she learned from that experience. In my junior year, I wrote out her words on yellow-lined notepaper and put it up on the wall in my room. She says, "What I've had since the civil rights movement is a better knowledge of who I am in this society, an understanding of my power as a person to stand and speak and act on any issue that I feel applies to me in some way, and therefore to other people. My power as a person to stand and speak and act." It's important to get to the end of that sentence. As Nelson Mandela said, recognize that the world is hungry for action, not words. Act with courage and vision. On any issue that I feel applies to me, also an important point, directly affected people should be at the table. It's fundamental that we should have a say in the decisions that affect our lives, that all of us should. There are so many issues, interests, social justice movements I could draw on, but I want to just say a word about two civil rights cases that the U.S. Supreme Court decided earlier this year. In Allen versus Milligan, the court struck down Alabama's congressional districts because they violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The court said Alabama must draw 2 congressional districts that give African Americans in that state an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. In the weeks following that decision, the Alabama legislature has openly defied the U.S. Supreme Court, saying we don't agree with what the U.S. Supreme Court said, and we are submitting for approval a map that does not comply with their mandate. Contrast that with the reaction to Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC. As you know, the court held that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment does not permit Harvard and UNC and any other institution to consider race as a factor in deciding who to admit, widely understood as an end to affirmative action programs in higher education. In the weeks since that decision, immediate compliance has been the record, and some say there is over-compliance, namely that programs are being eliminated that have nothing to do with admissions if they involve any consideration or even mention of race. So what's the distinction that explains the difference in reaction to these rulings? I don't have an answer. I would start maybe by looking at whose rights are being vindicated in the different decisions. And just to say a word about the Students for Fair Admissions opinion, the court there ultimately concluded that diversity is something we can't measure, so we can't evaluate it as a court, so we can't say it passes constitutional muster. And interestingly, that's the same critique that underlies the Supreme Court's decision to conclude that partisan gerrymandering, the drawing of districts in a way that unfairly advantages one political party over another, that can't be evaluated under the Constitution because we can't measure it. And I would just submit to you that this notion of institutional incapacity of the court system is counterfactual. Courts all the time make judgments about these kinds of things. They are things that can be measured. And at its core, I believe the opinion rests on a false premise. One of the quotes in the opinion, distinctions between citizens solely because of their ancestry are by their very nature odious to a free people whose institutions are founded upon the doctrine of equality. Well, we can all agree with that as far as it goes, but which of our institutions was founded on, or even now can be said to be based on equality? We tolerate profound and pervasive inequalities. It is a cruel injustice, indeed, to base the denial of thoughtful and measured efforts to remedy past discrimination on a pretense that we have equality. And that also brings me to another fundamental flaw in the legal doctrine, the notion that affirmative action cannot be justified as a measure to remedy past discrimination. And that was the holding in Bakke back in 1978. And you'll remember that the civil rights community considered that decision a defeat, a loss, and we are now seeing the full ramifications of that loss in the current jurisprudence. So what can you do about all that? There's a lot of advice out there about the values of diversity, how they can still be achieved. The Department of Justice has already issued excellent guidance with real specifics. And each of these bicentennial medal awardees illustrate other amazing possibilities. I want to return to Bernice Reagan. She goes on in the interview to say, I learned that I did have a life to give for what I believed. Lots of people don't know that. They feel they don't have anything. When you understand that you do have a life, you do have a body, and you can put that on the line, it gives you a sense of power. So I was empowered by the civil rights movement. So understanding that I'm here only because of the courage of people who recognized their power and were willing to put their lives on the line, and that I'm not being called upon to make that kind of sacrifice, surely there's more I can do. And I'm not suggesting that we have to put our lives on the line. There are other options. Wherever you are, whatever you do for your day job, you can trade stocks, write code, compose symphonies, and still fully participate in democracy. Here are 4 ways you can make a difference on any issue that you care about, any issue that affects you. First, we need watchdogs and whistleblowers. You're going to become aware of things that are not fair. You can speak up about them. Shining a light can stop some abuses. Don't be silent in the face of hate. wherever it is directed. Secondly, we need influencers and thought leaders. Make your commitments, your values, and your views known throughout your networks. Your voice matters. Third are the role of advocates and allies. Those are slightly different roles, but together they involve listening to the lived experiences of our families, our communities, our colleagues. Help them find ways to tell their stories and stand shoulder to shoulder with them as they speak their truth to power. And finally, organizers and catalysts for change. Nothing is accomplished alone. Draw strength from the ability to join with others, even if it's just 3 or 4 of you around the proverbial kitchen table. I am suggesting these are elements of civic engagement. Voting is only one way to participate in democracy, and being fully engaged is how you bring your full self to your community. So my last quote from Bernice Reagan, she says, "I'm seeing what happens when you're Black, when you're a woman, when you're outside of categories that are comfortable. There are just 100 different ways of clashing. Yet I somehow know that I have a right, almost a responsibility, to struggle to be all of those things. If I don't work out in my lifetime who I am and fight for that space, then I will never be. I will be somebody else's representation or the society's representation of what it will tolerate me to be. I will never be. Wouldn't that be the greatest tragedy?" I think of the example of Polly Murray. She was from Durham, North Carolina, and became a 20th century human rights activist, legal scholar, feminist, author, poet, Episcopal priest, labor organizer, and a multiracial Black LGBTQ+ community member. That is certainly a lot of different ways of clashing. While it would take too much time to tell the full story of all she did, let me just take one snapshot. In April of 1944, she is just 2 months away from graduating from law school, standing with other Howard students outside Thompson's cafeteria in Washington, D.C. She watched as her fellow students went in, 2 or 3 at a time, and then it came to her turn. Upon entering, she picked up a tray, joined the serving line, and was refused service, as were all the other Black students. She went in and sat at a table with the others who'd been turned away. A crowd of hostile whites gathered on the sidewalk outside while picketers marched. The manager pleaded with the students to leave. They said they would stay until they were served. They read textbooks and poetry. By dinner time, the cafeteria relented and served them. The sit-in had been planned and strategized for months. They had trained in Gandhi's nonviolent principles. The students were thrilled to have a victory. But without much press attention to the protest, and with the president of Howard University fearing congressional backlash, ordering the students to suspend their activities, the cafeteria quietly returned to its "no Negroes allowed" policy. This was 1944. She was graduating from law school and already a trailblazer defending justice. One lesson I take from this history is that we must have the long view, understanding that there are no quick fixes, and that true courage requires standing up for principle even when it's difficult and when victory is not assured. If I'm right, that democracy and justice require each of us to bring our full selves to participate in society, then there's no room for anyone to believe that they don't belong. By virtue of being human, you belong. And if you're feeling that society's representation is not really who you are, take heart. Bringing your full self is about figuring out which battles to fight for your space and when it won't diminish you to just let go. And it's about understanding that you have all that you need. We have to move beyond the scarcity framing, the notion that there's never enough time, we haven't done enough, we don't have enough, there isn't enough for everyone. In fact, you really do have all that you need right inside you and in community with others. Hopefully, that leads you to remember the joy. And I've learned this as a grandmother playing with my grandchildren. But just think back to your 6-year-old self and be that person again for a little while. It is actually just fine to play, have fun, and do what restores you. I am in awe of you. Your class started college during the pandemic. You have demonstrated that you are able to adapt and be resilient. Be all that you are, even if outside of comfortable categories. Fight for your space. Stand and speak and act on the things that affect you. And as the phenomenal poet Amanda Gorman reminds us, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. You, class of 2024, are the light. Be brave. I look forward to seeing how you shine. Thank you.